Hi, my name is Shannon Lee McPhee and this is my passion project. Today I'm going to be talking about my favorite video game, Dark Souls. This will really just be an intro to the universe and community of Dark Souls for people who have no idea what it is. But first, some backstory. My interest in video games goes all the way back to my early childhood when I was about 6. My first console was a Game Boy, then a Nintendo DS, and a PSP before the groundbreaking discovery of an Xbox 360. I currently have an Xbox One and a PS4. And I've played all sorts of games from MMORPGs to multiplayer first-person shooters to puzzle games, horror games, VR games, survival games, and my absolute favorite, role-playing games. Role-playing games are just incredibly diverse. You can play through the eyes of a well-known character, such as Lara Croft from Tomb Raider or Shepard from Mass Effect, or you can create a character that's entirely your own, such as in the Elder Scrolls or Fallout series, which makes for some interesting creations to be sure. They can also be single or multiplayer, but their main defining feature is that they take you to different worlds, whether that's medieval, ancient, magical, in space at the bottom of the ocean, or simply on an altered, scarier version of Earth. They all have a deep story that the player gets to be a part of, and I've always loved that. This is the kind of game that Dark Souls is. My first encounter with Dark Souls was quite a few years ago. I love to watch YouTube videos of people gaming, and PewDiePie has been a long-term favorite of mine. At the time, only Dark Souls 1 and 2 were available, and he had played through both. Although his playthroughs were uninformative and incomplete, the videos were purely for entertainment and were absolutely hilarious. I found myself watching them over and over again and finally decided to try the games out for myself. The only one I could find, however, was Dark Souls 2, and after many hours of getting nowhere, I finally got my hands on a copy of Dark Souls 1, and this is where I fell in love with the games. Over the past 5 years, I have 100% completed Dark Souls 1 and 3, and I'm currently working on 2. To put that into perspective, this means that I have achieved every possible achievement, gotten every ending, all armor, weapons, equipment, covenants, sorceries, miracles, pyromancies, rings, and many other things. It took roughly 500 hours in total, and that's only of gameplay. But feats like this aren't uncommon in the Dark Souls community. There are people that play through the entire games without getting hit once, or use a broken weapon, or no weapons at all. Dark Souls fans tend to be a little crazy. If you took one look at my room, you would see all of my posters, my games, collectibles, guidebooks, stickers, sweatshirts, and t-shirts, and think that I might have a problem. Not to mention the amount of times I've been able to use Dark Souls in school projects dating all the way back to 9th grade, including this one. I've spent years learning its soundtrack on my violin, and I made my gamer tags on both Xbox and PlayStation Dark Souls references. I even met one of my closest friends through Dark Souls, so yeah. I'm a big fan. That seems like plenty of backstory. Let's actually talk about the game itself. Dark Souls is a fantasy action RPG series developed by the Japanese gaming company From Software and published by Bandai Namco Games. Its spiritual successor was Demon Souls, a very similar medieval RPG that set a precedence for the style of games that From Software has become famous for. Third-person fantasy adventure games that feature intricate level design, hard bosses, a very specific combat system, and beautifully complex lore. And I mean very complex lore. But by far, From Software and Dark Souls itself is most famous for being quote-unquote the hardest games ever. But these days, game journalists will call anything Dark Souls-like if they can't beat it, and honestly I'm surprised that any of them even made it past the tutorials. But that's tea for another time. Demon Souls was released in 2009 and is considered the first game in the Soulsborne series. Soulsborne consists of Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne. Dark Souls 1 was released in 2011, shortly after Demon Souls, and despite their striking similarities, they are in different universes and not connected. But Dark Souls 1 was critically acclaimed, and to this day is often referred to as genre-defining and one of the best games ever made. This is surprising, considering that the second and third games are the ones that won Game of the Year, and the first one didn't. Its sequel was released in 2014, but was met with great uproar in the Dark Souls community. It even became a common joke to hate on this game. Dark Souls 1 was directed by Hidetaka Miyazaki, whereas Dark Souls 2 was directed by Tomohiro Shibuya and Yui Tanimura. Shibuya and Tanimura decided to go with a different feel from the first game. They attempted to make it in a different time and place from the first, and they even went as far as to change many of the game's mechanics. I won't go into details to why some of these things take away from the game, because it would not make sense unless you have played both and truly understand the differences, as I do. But personally, I felt that the game was clunkier, slower, and had a lot of unnecessary mechanics to it. However, if Dark Souls 2 was a standalone game and not compared to its predecessor, it would have been met with much more excitement and praise. There are good things about this game. The art style is all its own and resulted in beautiful landscapes, the weapons and armor were unique, and the story still gave players a sense of journey and importance as a Dark Souls game should. Fast forward to 2016, Miyazaki made a comeback and produced Dark Souls 3, which followed the same style, place, and story as the first game, but with all new textures, designs, and multiplayer capabilities. It is truly the best Dark Souls game. It feels as if they took the best parts of 1 and 2 and used them to create a masterpiece. All of the games have DLCs with extra content, but Dark Souls 3 DLCs have some of my favorite areas and bosses in the entire series. With all that information, I bet you're wondering what these games are even about. While most games give you a story, Dark Souls expects you to find it, whether that's through research, character dialogue, or even tirelessly picking through item descriptions. But I'll break it down for you as simple as I possibly can. Essentially, there's this medieval fantasy world where fire is the source of all power and life. A long time ago, the flame started to die out and humans started to go insane. They became cursed with the dark sign and hungered for souls, dying over and over again only to keep coming back. You are one of these humans. Throughout all 3 games, you kill the most powerful beings and collect millions of souls until you're powerful enough to make the choice of either perpetuating the flame by sacrificing yourself, thus keeping the world going, or letting the flame go out to leave the world in darkness, thus letting it finally end. This choice isn't as easy as it sounds. It's blurred with moral ambiguity. While keeping the world going sounds good, it may be more of a mercy to end it, considering that everything alive wants to kill you, and the few good people you meet along the way eventually go insane or die. If it sounds dramatic, that's because it is. The inherent goodness or evilness of these endings has been a source of debate in the community for years, and its philosophical implications have fascinated me for a long time. Of course, there are slight story differences between the 3, but this is the very basic fundamentals of their plotlines. Dark Souls 3 was the last game in the Dark Souls series as well as the Soulsborne series if you go by release dates, since Bloodborne was released a year before Dark Souls 3 in 2015. The latest releases from Software were in 2018 with Dark Souls 1 Remastered and 2019 with Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro definitely followed the style of these games, but is not counted as part of the Soulsborne series because of its major combative and mechanical differences. It's also interesting that all of the Soulsborne games were based on specific time periods in Europe, from medieval knights to gothic horror, but Sekiro jumped right into ancient Japan instead, making it very unique. In recent news, though, From Software, the creator of Dark Souls, and George R.R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones, are said to be collaborating on a new independent project called Elden Ring. It is rumored to be based off of Norse mythology and may follow the same basic premises as their other games, and I, for one, am so excited. One last fun fact before we go. There's actually a common character throughout all of the Soulsborne games despite being in different universes. In Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, and Dark Souls 3, he is called Trusty Patches. In Dark Souls 2, he is called Mild-Mannered Pate, and in Bloodborne, he is called Patches the Spider. Despite having slightly different names and different voice actors, we know they are all the same character because they all do the same thing. They act all friendly and kind, and then they kick the player into a trap while boasting about how they'll get all of your loot. He is a bald, squatting, and backstabbing Easter egg that all Souls fans loathe. There is the choice to kill him when you come out of the trap, although he's much more valuable as a vendor should you choose to forgive him, for whatever reason you can find. And that concludes the presentation. A quick thank you to all the people who worked on these games, and to my best Souls battle buddy who has put up with my shenanigans for way too many years now. I hope this was informative and entertaining, and I appreciate you letting me talk your ear off. Bye-bye!